From truth, we turn to dignity. For the second moment when silence betrays us is when our boundaries are crossed, when others trample on our worth, disrespect our humanity, or treat us as though our dignity is of no account. And here too many of us fall into the trap of silence, believing that by enduring quietly we are avoiding conflict, that by not speaking we are preserving peace. Yet this peace is an illusion, because each unchallenged violation of our boundaries erodes us from within. Each act of disrespect endured in silence corrodes the spirit. And as the Stoics taught, the inner self is sacred. The citadel of reason and dignity is to be guarded more fiercely than gold. Yet how often do we allow fear of confrontation to open its gates to invaders? How often do we sacrifice dignity to avoid awkwardness? And Seneca warned that a man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. And his words cut to the heart of this silence. For when we endure disrespect, not by choice but by weakness, when we absorb humiliation out of fear, we create unnecessary suffering, a pain deeper than the initial offense. Because in yielding our voice we yield our self-respect, and in doing so we betray not only the present moment but the long-term stability of our soul. For soon the habit of silence becomes a habit of servitude, and we shrink ourselves to accommodate those who would walk upon us. And this shrinking does not make us noble. It makes us invisible, bitter, and small. And so when our boundaries are violated, speaking is not arrogance but necessity. It is not pride but preservation. For to declare calmly and clearly that our dignity is not for sale, that our peace is not open for trespass, is to teach others where they end and where we begin. And though many fear that such speech will drive people away, in truth it builds respect, because boundaries are not walls but signposts. They are not weapons but guides, and when set with composure and calm, authority. The third moment where silence becomes betrayal is when our conscience itself speaks. For deep within every human being exists a voice that does not shout but whispers, a compass that does not command but gently insists. And though the world around us may pressure us to conform, to nod in agreement when we disagree, to smile outwardly while our spirit inwardly cries out against falsehood, the voice of conscience does not bend. And when we ignore it, when we silence it for the sake of comfort, approval, or safety, we do not betray others as much as we betray ourselves. For Marcus Aurelius warned that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, and when we repeatedly silence conscience, that dye darkens into cowardice and regret, until we are no longer free souls, but painted shells carrying the stains of silence. For though we may fool others with our outward composure, we cannot fool ourselves. And the harshest judgment is not from the crowd, but from the self, and no prison is heavier than a conscience silenced into submission. And here the cost of silence far outweighs the cost of speaking. For what good is it to earn the applause of others if we are condemned within our own minds? What value has the approval of the crowd if our conscience sits in chains? And though speaking from conscience often means losing favor, enduring criticism, or facing ridicule, the price of silence is far greater. For silence here costs us integrity, and once integrity is gone, nothing remains but performance, a hollow image of virtue with no truth beneath, a shell that smiles outwardly while rotting within. And the tragedy is that the more we silence conscience, the weaker its voice becomes, until one day it falls quiet altogether, leaving us wandering in moral darkness with no compass to guide us. And so the demand upon us is clear. When conscience calls, we must speak, not recklessly, not arrogantly, but faithfully, calmly, firmly. For integrity is preserved not by grand speech. The fourth and final situation where silence must never prevail is in the face of injustice. For there exists a silence that does not preserve peace, but nourishes corruption. And when we witness cruelty, deceit, exploitation, or oppression and yet choose to look away, comforting ourselves with the thought that we are protecting our own tranquility, we are living in delusion. For what tranquility can be built upon the suffering of others? What peace rests upon injustice? And Epictetus reminded us that though a tyrant may fetter our leg, our will remains beyond the reach of even Zeus. And this will, this unbreakable power of choice, is the mark of a truly free person, and thus the will to resist evil, to speak against injustice, is not merely a right, but the very essence of freedom. For to remain silent in the presence of injustice is to surrender freedom itself, to exchange the strength of our soul for the comfort of cowardice. And once a man knows the truth but refuses to speak it, he has already surrendered to fear. And fear is the most binding chain of all, stronger than iron, heavier than shackles, enslaving more surely than any prison. And yet here lies the paradox that unsettles many. When we raise our voice against injustice, we may lose favor, we may make enemies, we may suffer, but in that suffering we discover fortitude, and in that fortitude we discover freedom. For the Stoic does not measure life by ease or comfort, but by virtue lived, and Marcus Aurelius urged us not to waste time arguing about what a good man should be, but to be one, which is to say not to theorize endlessly about justice, but to live justly, not to admire courage from a distance, but to embody it in action, not to debate virtue, but to practice it. And in doing so our words become more than sound. They become acts of justice, a refusal to collude with wrong by the cowardice of silence. And so when injustice arises, silence is complicity, silence is betrayal, silence is the comfort of th.
Life presents us with countless moments where silence feels like the easier path, where remaining quiet spares us confrontation, where muteness shields us from criticism, and where we imagine that by not speaking we are preserving harmony. But wisdom teaches us that not all silence is noble and not all quiet is virtuous, for there exists a silence that shields peace and there exists a silence that betrays the soul, and to live wisely we must learn the difference, because in a world where lies circulate freely, where injustice thrives, and where exploitation grows in the absence of resistance, remaining silent when speech is demanded is not neutrality but complicity, not wisdom but cowardice, not serenity but surrender. And so the task before us is to discern when silence serves strength and when it serves betrayal. For there are 4 decisive situations in which silence becomes a poison to the spirit: when truth is attacked, when our boundaries are crossed, when conscience calls us, and when injustice reigns. And each of these demands that we not remain quiet but speak with clarity, composure, and courage. For speech in such moments is not noise but virtue, not arrogance but dignity in action. And the Stoics such as Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded us that wisdom is not found in shouting, nor in indulging anger, but in words sharpened by reason and steady with composure. And in their example we see that to refrain from speech when speech is demanded is to betray both truth and the soul itself. And the first of these great trials comes when truth is under attack, because so often we witness lies spreading before us, falsehoods taking root in the minds of people, and yet we tell ourselves that it is better to remain silent, to avoid quarrel, to rise above the fray. But the reality is that silence in the face of lies strengthens the liar, for as Epictetus reminded us, it is not what people say about us that should concern us but whether what they say